because quite often, and this works both ways, employee and employer, if you can have an early conversation about something that you're not happy with, quite often it's easily resolved. If you say to somebody, what you've just said to me has upset me and this is why, more often than not, the person who said that thing is kind of, oh, I didn't realise that's how you've taken it.
Is HR a good avenue to seek support from, or is it a bit tricky?
Yeah, there will be certain situations where you can talk to the individual that's the concern, if that's the right way of putting it. But there's certain situations that's not a comfortable situation and it's not the right thing to do, in which case there will be a grievance process within the organisation that the individual can follow.
I see. And you mentioned grievance as a procedure. Can we dive in a little bit in terms of explaining further what that might mean?
So grievance procedure is an avenue for an individual within an organisation to raise a complaint about something that has happened to them within their employment.
Navigating the path to success means you constantly need to build up your skills, and I'm thrilled to have with us today for the Future of Skills podcast Julie Temple, who is the leading solicitor, the head of the employment law team at the Birkin Long at LLP. And also, Julie serves as the vice chair of the CIPD, the Chartered Institute of Personnel and Development. Julie is also a mommy of 4 children, no other than Alex, Harriet, Freya, and Gabriella. Julie, welcome. It's such a pleasure having you in today. Thank you for joining us to discuss a very interesting topic, and that is career challenges and how to professionally, in a legal form, address them and resolve them.
Well, it's great to be here. Thank you for having me.
Julie, we have a traditional question as part of our podcast, and because the vision of the Future of Skills podcast is to bring about and prepare the young generations, the young professionals who are either starting their career or switching their careers, to be able to navigate the advancement in technology easier by knowing which skills to focus their attention on and build up from the ground up. Now, the first question that we usually ask our guests is, please kindly describe yourself in 3 words of your choice.
Okay, so kind, informed and direct.
I can definitely see the first word coming through. Can we please tackle a little bit of the directness? Because I appreciate that working in a legal department, having a career of more than 2 decades has not been easy. And that comes with a lot more assertiveness, a lot more persuasion, a lot more perseverance. Can you give us a little bit of a few examples into your direct form of communication?
Yeah, well, I think as a solicitor, you come to us for advice, and if I'm a bit wishy-washy, if I'm a bit on the fence, then that's not very helpful. So I can sometimes be delivering messages that clients don't want to hear, and I do that in a kind way, but I also do it in a direct way because I need to leave no room for there to be any confusion. So, I mean, in terms of examples, we will quite frequently be called up by prospective clients asking for some guidance on a query. And, if I feel there is no case, then I will be direct and I will say, I can understand why you're upset. I can understand why you've come to us. But actually, there is, as I see it, no case there for you to pursue. And therefore, it's not really worth you spending any more time on it. It's not worth you investing the fees and that sort of thing. And I need to be direct in what I do. Otherwise, I have to leave no room for confusion.
Thank you so much for sharing this, Julie. It also sounds that when it comes in tandem with the integrity element, the honesty, it's better received in that case, right? It leaves, as you say, no room for interpretation, which is probably better from the ground up.
Yeah, absolutely. And I mean, a lot of what we do is in the employment law sphere is a range of reasonable responses. So there can be some grey areas, and it's important, as I see it, to deliver that in a very clear way so that people understand what their legal risks are and they can make an informed decision on what path they may take, because there's always more than one path that can be taken. And, delivering that message clearly, concisely, persuasively, hopefully, but directly is really, really important.
Something to learn, especially from the young professionals, someone who is just tapping their toes into the corporate or the career world. On that note, talking about the career pathway, can we please find out from yourself, how have you found yourself in the employment law, in the legal sphere as a whole? Were there any challenges or triggers? How would you describe that pathway?
I can't remember ever wanting to be anything other than a solicitor. I wanted to be in law.
So it was a vocation.
Yeah, absolutely, absolutely. And I mean, I remember watching a TV program, American TV program called LA Law, that some may not be familiar with. And it was about a law firm in the US doing a whole range of different things. I fully appreciated that wasn't reality, but it just, I don't know, inspired something in me in terms of seeing how these people made a difference, seeing how they helped. And I've always, as I say, I've always wanted to be a solicitor. My work experience at school was around that. I spent some time at the local authority in the law department, in the legal department there. I did a reception job over a summer period in a law firm, and that's always been there. And yeah, I've just kind of followed that path all the way through. Went to university, did the law school LLP course in Chester, got my job at Burkitt Long as a trainee, and then I kind of went into employment law and never looked back. Absolutely love it.
It proves your dedication, right? And the pursuit of certain visions that you would have had from the very early days. Talking about the early days, we have another question on that ground, and that's your childhood or related to that. Can you please let us know, were there any particular traits or anything that you can look back and say, these are my passions that I've actually pursued and they've stayed with me all along?
Yeah, I mean, I remember my dad was kind of very much behind both my brother and I in terms of our education. He was very keen for us to do well, as indeed was my mum. My mum was as supportive. But I remember one particular moment in school, and I was in a maths lesson, and I was asking a question, and I started off as quite often some people do. I think this might be a silly question, and I can't remember for the life of me what the question was. My maths teacher sort of turned around and said, "Julie, there's no such thing as a silly question." And I've carried that through, and I will always be asking questions. And I would encourage anyone out there in their early careers, ask questions. Through asking questions, you get people's insights, you get that knowledge, you learn. And do you know what? We have all got something to learn from everybody else. And, I very much have carried that through. So I will ask questions, whatever sphere it is, whether it's in my personal life, whether it's in my professional life. I'm constantly thinking, why is that? What's that for? And I think it helps you to build those skills and that knowledge and that understanding, and actually to be able to relate to people depending on what your profession is.
Absolutely. And if anything, it also proves that you care, you're interested, right? You're showing your curiosity in order to help, maybe to support as part of that. So it's, it's an element that is absolutely necessary as part of the journey. I personally see it that way. We had another guest on the program who did mention, as part of his own career, asking question was also one of the key elements of growing, in the personal development. So you can't just stay away from that. It needs to be part of it. You've obviously built a successful career within the employment law. What drives you? What keeps you up at night? And what inspires you to go that extra mile within it?
Well, I think I appreciate that we're all different, and it's part of asking questions is understanding different people's backgrounds and understanding that there are different perspectives on a situation. One of the things that has stuck with me, that I've seen on social media, is this picture of a number 9 and someone standing at one end and someone standing at, a number 9 or a number 6, and it depends on which side you're looking at it. And that has, as I say, it's stuck with me a lot in terms of saying two people can be looking at exactly the same thing, but from different angles, different perspectives.
Totally, yeah.
One person's looking at a number 9, but one person's looking at a number 6. None of them are wrong. And that's a big part of what I do in my profession as well. There's an employer and there's an employee. Both both lived through the same experience, but both experienced it in very different ways. And, one of my passions is trying to make sure that both of those parties, whichever side I'm acting for, and I do act for both, can see the other person's perspective. You're looking at a number 9, they're looking at a number 6. How do we meet in the middle, and how can we resolve that situation? And quite often it's conflict, and it's trying to cut through those emotions as well. And I encourage clients to kind of step back. And one of the things I say quite often we'll hear is, it's the principle. Yes, it's the principle, but you've got to try and move forward from this, and we've got to try and find the solution. And that's, that can keep me up at night as well, because it's a really difficult, it's an emotional situation. It's emotional for the employee, who, this is their livelihood, this is how they pay the mortgage. It's also emotional for the individuals from the employer. They don't want to be seen to have done anything wrong. They want to help for the most part, and the vast majority of businesses, the vast majority of managers, they're not horrible, evil people. They want to help, they want to do the right thing, and it's trying to cut through all of that. And when the emotions are involved as well, that's even more difficult.
See, the subject that you're raising is quite particular, in a sense that for whoever might find themselves in a position to experience the need to then address for professional legal services, they probably have come to a stage when they can't necessarily handle those emotions in a appropriate way, hence why they need that professional help. But you've inspired me to ask you this question just now on the spot, really. Do you think usually there might be some solutions that could be offered before they would get that professional advice, just at the emotional level stage, just so they can resolve that conflict first somehow, or try to, and then professionally see, do we really need to go down that route?
Yeah, I think one of the things I will always encourage, if I'm talking to friends, for example, and they're saying, look, I'm in this situation at work, as quite often can happen, as you might imagine, my first advice would be, can you talk to the individuals involved, or is there somebody within the organisation you can talk to? Because quite often, and this works both ways, employee and employer, if you can have an early conversation about something that you're not happy with, quite often it's easily resolved. If you say to somebody, what you've just said to me has upset me and this is why, more often than not, the person who said that thing is kind of, oh, I didn't realise that's how you've taken it. I can't see how you've taken it in that way. It's not what I meant. And you have that conversation, the air's cleared and you can move on. If those conversations aren't had, quite often things can snowball, and each next thing can be something that's perceived, rightly or wrongly, in a particular way, and those emotions build. And so I would encourage anybody who is in a situation where they feel unhappy to try and have those conversations, and in the hope that would resolve it. And you wouldn't need to come to a solicitor, you wouldn't need to seek legal advice, and you wouldn't need to enter into a situation where you're in a claim situation. So yeah, that would be my recommendation.
I resonate with that deeply. I had a case, someone who was planning to leave her job was thinking about the fact that she's no longer that happy as she used to be in that position. Because I'm also a mental health first aider, she thought maybe she can come to me for an advice. The only thing that I did was to encourage her to say, you've got a set of skills that you can rely on, so why not continue to do your best and see what comes out of that. And I'm pleased to say she's been promoted not once in that role. Situations has changed in there. She just believed in herself a little bit more. I presume that element helps. It's about who do you go to when it comes to the need to have that initial conversation before you take the major decision to step down or do some other actions in regards to your employment. But that's actually paving the way nicely to the next question in terms of the employment solicitor needs when to come up to that position. So in your experience, who are the people or organizations that most often seek employment legal support, and are there specific situations or challenges that commonly prompt them to reach out?
Yeah, I don't think there is any particular type of organisation or indeed person who might come and seek legal advice. Employment law is across every single industry, every single sector. It applies to every single individual in the workplace. There's no particular industry as such. In terms of queries, I mean, it's evolved over the years, and certainly, we're seeing currently a lot more queries around flexible working. Obviously, post-COVID, different businesses dealing with the post-COVID working environment in different ways. Different individuals wanting different things from their workplace, and in terms of previously, we still get involved in disciplinaries and grievances and that type of thing, as well as lots of employment tribunal claims, equal pay cases, and a lot more discrimination claims now. We are seeing that sort of going up as well, and I think that's around awareness of individuals being, I don't know what the right expression is, but certainly individuals are more willing to challenge things that they feel are not appropriate within the workplace, and that's got to be a good thing.
When is it safe for them to think that they're justified to do so? What I mean by safe is that sometimes, and I'm only trying to assume in such a situation, if you feel that you're in a position to address a question on the basis of discrimination or maybe some other claim, you need, in a most reasonable way, to feel that you've got the right level of proof that you've accumulated over time. What is classified as proof in this case, and when is it safe for them to seek for such a support in order to avoid in a position where their career is jeopardized, their long-term career is jeopardized?
Yeah. Well, I think the starting goes back to what we were saying earlier in terms of if, as an individual within an organisation, you feel that something's not right, then...
Just sense checking, yeah?
Yeah, absolutely. Then I would say the first step would be to talk to somebody within the organisation. If something is, you've spoken to somebody within the organisation and nothing's been done, then at that point I would say speak to a legal advisor. And, or if it's so serious that you don't feel that you can talk to anyone within the organisation, then get legal advice at an early stage from a trusted source. And quite often, I mean, we offer at Beckett Long a sort of 15-minute free consultation. And as I mentioned earlier, I will quite often during those conversations say to people, I understand why you've got in touch, but there isn't a basis on which for you to take this forward. And, legal proceedings are costly. There's no doubt about that. And, quite often someone can perceive that something is wrong or has, they've been wrongly done by. And yes, I can understand that, but that doesn't mean that there's a legal claim to flow from that. So getting advice early can mean that individuals get that clarity, they get that directness from somebody, and they can then make a decision. Is this workplace right for me? Is it just not the right culture fit? Or is there something wrong that I do want to challenge? So that would be, I would always encourage, deal with it directly if you can. If not, seek advice, and you can get that early guidance in terms of, yes, there's something to pursue, or no, there isn't, and you can then make your decision to go forward. And if it is a case of, no, there's nothing, there's no legal claim, the individual can then make their career decisions on the back of that and kind of go, no, this isn't the place for me, or let's see if I can try and work things out. And as you say, your friend, they made those decisions and they've successfully progressed within that same organisation. So it's having those courageous, direct conversations sometimes, or seeking the advice to know what to do.
Julie, thank you for this. In terms of you were mentioning going to a certain person as part of the organization to ask the question, assume you're not suggesting necessarily to ask this question on the back of the actual person that is causing those feelings with you, right? Or you're saying that there's also an avenue to discuss this with them, being fully transparent, or leaving this on the case of, okay, let me see if my suspicions are right by checking with a third party. And what would be the best third party? Is it a mental health first aider? Or because not all organizations are having that type of person within. Is HR a good avenue to seek support from, or is it a bit tricky?
Yeah, there will be certain situations where you can talk to the individual that the concern, if that's the right way of putting it. But there's certain situations that's not a comfortable situation, and it's not the right thing to do. In which case, there will be a grievance process within the organisation that the individual can follow. You might have a trusted colleague that you could talk to, whose view you would, trust, and yes, that's something you should take forward, or no, it isn't. I think you're being too sensitive, or whatever the case may be. Or it could be, another manager. It could be HR, just as a sounding board to kind of check before you do go down the grievance process. So, there's lots of different approaches, and it depends on the individual, depends on what the situation is as to which one is the best fit for that individual. And actually, some individuals will not want that challenge. They will just go, this isn't the right place for me, and they will leave and move on. And, that in that situation, for me, with working with employers, we're always looking at turnover rates. Does that indicate there's an issue? That perhaps someone not had the bravery to step up and go, there's something wrong. But, there's indicators, flags both ways for employees and employers to kind of look at what the right next steps would be.
I see. And you mentioned grievance as a procedure. Can we dive in a little bit in terms of explaining further what that might mean?
So grievance procedure is an avenue for an individual within an organisation to raise a complaint about something that has happened to them within their employment. And the obligation on the employer, having received that complaint, is to investigate it, meet with the employee, and then reach a decision on the back of that investigation. That decision obviously can go in favour of the employee and should include kind of, how can we resolve this situation going forward, making sure it doesn't happen again for others in the organisation. Or it can be, actually, there's no merit in your complaint. The individual that you've made the complaint against, or the circumstance you've made the complaint against, is reasonable, it's fair, it's appropriate. And quite often individuals might, an example that's just going through my head is an individual who is being performance managed. They perceive their performance as great, but the business perceives their performance as not great. And that's a difficult situation. But the employer is entitled to performance manage unless there's something, underlying. And I think one of the things we'll come on to.
Yeah, it's expecting.
Is, and ultimately it's again goes back to that number 9, number 6 thing in terms of trying to recognise and understand the other side's perspective. And a big thing is communication. How you communicate that somebody is underperforming. And one of the things that I will always advise, whether it's an employee or an employer, have examples. It is much more difficult for individuals to be, at loggerheads if there are concrete examples of an underperformance situation, or, an employee making a complaint about a manager. This is what the manager said to me. If you go in and say that the manager's, not behaved appropriately towards me, that's not really something an employer can work with. So both sides, be direct, have your examples so that, there's something to work with.
And in this case, you're saying that the right medium or the right organization that would uncover the rights or the wrongs in between the two parties would be the HR, or would it need to be somebody else as a...
A lot of, the approach within organisations varies greatly. And I, again, working with employers, I will encourage managers to take responsibility for what is going on within the business rather than to delegate that to a HR team. Quite a lot of organisations do have HR, where the HR will be the individuals who are looking at the grievance. And I understand both points of view in terms of an independence from a team. HR don't have that connection. They won't necessarily have the, employees can perceive, different managers will be wanting to protect different managers, and arguably HR won't have that. They'll have that independence, and they won't have that draw to automatically defend or brush things under the carpet. But equally, there is a strength in having managers who are able to look at those things, see the perceptions, and reach decisions on what is the rights and wrongs. And I will always encourage individuals, if the sky is blue, say the sky is blue. Don't try and say it's cloudy if you can clearly see it's something different. Because ultimately, if you end up in an employment tribunal room, the chances are the tribunal are going to see through that. And you're going to be the one who's in the stand trying to defend your decision that the sky was blue on, or cloudy on that particular day. If it's a picture there and it's blue, that's what it is.
Yeah, exactly. Just making it a bit more clear, isn't it? And we do have a case that you've alluded to that's part of the conversation. And this case is part of the recent trend. Again, we've alluded to this trend a little bit earlier today. The fact that flexible working becomes quite important for many. The work preferences are changing in favor of a little bit more flexibility and a little bit more adaptability down that route, adaptability on the side of the employer. Hence why there's been a survey that Aviva has found that since March 2020, 90% of employees have started a side hustle contributing to their income and personal development. And then given this landscape, it's crucial to understand how employers perceive and manage employees' external ventures, because there might be perceptions around those side hustles as if the commitment is not there for the role anymore. And therefore, how do we resolve this as part of the employment relationship? So the scenarios that we have at the moment is, let's explore a specific one. Imagine that there is a line manager who calls an ad hoc meeting with an employee to discuss concerns about their commitment to the role, citing their involvement with a personal project such as running a podcast or a blog as a potential conflict. So the manager then presents two options: immediate resignation or placement on a performance improvement plan, or the PIP, to demonstrate that their impact on the role has diminished. So despite no concrete evidence of underperformance. So then the question becomes, is this a valid cause for an employee to seek support from an employment solicitor? And then what should employees in such situations consider when deciding how to respond, and are there any specific rights that or protections that they should be aware of?
Yeah, well, for the vast majority of situations, the starting point for an employee is to look at what the employment contract says. Because in this scenario, the contract could say that individuals can't perform anything outside of their workplace, any type of venture, in which case there's a potential issue there that the employer is validly taking forward. There will be other things in terms of is the employee using working time for their employer to pursue their side venture and or workplace equipment, that belongs to the employer that, they should only be using for their work venture. If in this scenario we assume that there's none of those things, then the employer is acting, unreasonably in that situation, because the employee has not done anything wrong. And again, if we assume that the side hustle isn't in competition with the employer, then as long as the employee, they're focusing on their work during their working time, they are not using equipment, but they're doing something out of hours. If their performance is not impacted, and there's the scenario is that there's no evidence of that, then the employer is arguably doing something wrong. And I think that would be one example where it would be sensible to seek advice, and that advice could cut through things quite quickly, because it would be a pushback drafted for the employee to send, or an intervention from the solicitor themselves, which might be taken more seriously, where it's look, there's nothing in my contract, I'm not breaching anything, there's no evidence of underperformance, therefore what you're doing is not right. And that's a good example of having evidence. If the employee has got evidence of their performance, they can go into that conversation with the concrete, look, where's my performance indicated? Where's the dip that you're saying is there? Similarly, if the employer's got evidence, produce it. Demonstrate to the employee that there is that dip in performance, and that's why there's that concern.
Fair enough, and the conversation makes total sense when it comes to, first off, looking at the base, which is the employment contract, right? And that's the key element. And then from there, navigating where is that reasonable part? Is that still reasonable from the employer's side to actually navigate and figure out if, some of the equipment has been used, if not, or if the office hours have been used, if not, then, how reasonable is that as a claim? And it's good to understand as well that when the employee then shows that or signals to the employer that the awareness of their rights are in place, and it's been taken a little bit more seriously because there's this backup and the employment legal support is in action, then in that case it would be, I assume, perceived slightly differently from the side of the employer.
Yeah, it's really difficult because I do quite often advise employers, and we, when an individual says I've sought legal advice, it's really important to make sure that if you have sought legal advice, it's from a trusted source, because quite often we'll read something and we, touching on AI now, we will look at it and go, that's been drafted by AI. And, it will reference legal advice, and we look at it and we go, well, that's bad legal advice. And from that point on, it's a really difficult, you're in conflict again. Mm-hmm. And, so I would say, and when I'm advising employees, I will quite often advise straight off the bat, don't say I've taken legal advice. By all means, put the legal advice that you've been given into an opening conversation, but don't say you've taken legal advice, because again, that ramps up the conversation. They've taken legal advice, so therefore the employer will take legal advice. Gotcha. And it can become quite confrontational quite quickly.
So it needs to be tactical as of when do you utilise that phrase.
Absolutely. And, gently say, I'm aware that I've got that right. And therefore what you're doing is not correct. But if you go in and you're combative straight off the bat, and there are circumstances that's appropriate, but there are circumstances where it's not, and it is just going to ramp up that conversation, and it's going to make it more difficult to arrive at a resolution, which is quite often what both parties want to do. And, if you have a, open conversation, I don't think what you're doing is right, and this is why, then, you give the opportunity to the employer to go, well, actually, yes, reflecting on it, you're right. And they can more easily back down and accept that what they've done is wrong.
See, it proves to be an art as much as it is a communication in itself in the process. So it's good to know what type of tools to utilize and when in particular. And then there's another case that we thought that, okay, now that we're discussing the employment law, why not discuss particular cases? And this one presents its context. We're seeing industries like tech being significantly impacted by AI that you've nicely alluded to, and being a little bit cautious when it comes to the advice that we would perceive from AI in that sense. But with a growing number of roles such as call center agents, copywriters, baseline graphic designers, and operational analysts facing the risk of AI-driven replacement or even unemployment. Here we're wondering, because redundancies might be taken or perceived as a cost-cutting benefit on the side of the employer, what rights do we feel that the employee is being left with when it comes to questioning the fairness of the redundancy policy within the organization?
Yeah, I mean, redundancy is, it's a no-fault dismissal, if I can put it like that. It's not, an employer isn't saying you haven't done your job properly or you haven't done something in the way that we would want you to have done. So it can be an easy way of manoeuvring somebody out. But equally, employers are facing a lot of challenges at the moment. They've got the same rising costs as us as individuals are facing within, our own households, etc., etc. And there are those cost-cutting exercises that need to take place. There are advances in technology that are changing how things are done.
Yeah,
and
totally.
Some individuals, absolutely, with machines, their role is now no longer needed. But from a redundancy perspective, it's looking at, okay, well, who does the role that's being impacted? Therefore, is the approach that the employer is taking fair, or are they just targeting one individual? And, that's the conversation I have with anyone who might contact us and say, look, I've been put at risk of redundancy. I don't think it's fair. Okay, well, who else is doing your role? If you're one person, one role, how else can they, who else should they be involving? But also what's happened in the past that might indicate the employer is targeting somebody deliberately. And is anyone else being impacted? Or if you're a role of one, are they reorganising any other part of the business? And those sorts of things that might indicate that there is a difference in treatment. There might be something that's untoward that is going on, covering up something that, they might not want to go down the path of for whatever reason. But I see AI as something that we will be working with rather than something to be fearful of. But I appreciate different people who've got, vastly different views on it.
Yes, it's a very sensitive topic already, even though it's not yet in its full potential, I don't think, but it's already creating a lot of stir everywhere, pretty much in any industry. The question I would have here related to AI and the unemployment phase and the redundancies, because obviously in the media we're already aware that there is a lot of redundancies waves out there within pretty much any sector, and it's there probably only the beginning of, if anything. What do you think would be the logical type of action for an employee in a situation where they do realize that their role might be at risk, not even from the position of being told that the role is at risk, but them sensing that, there might be that the remit is already diminishing, is getting smaller, the responsibilities are already not what they used to be. And so it's a hint for them to already start and do something. So what needs to be the logical pathway of an employee in order to navigate that situation he already senses?
Yeah, the important thing is, as an individual doing a job, do the job well. Mm-hmm. And if you can see that things are, because whether it's AI, whether it's something else, things are being, there's an evolution in your role, then it's looking for the opportunities to work with that evolution. And as you say, looking at what skills you might need to actually be in charge of that evolution, to lead that evolution. And, the individuals who get on board with that evolution and adopt it early, take it forward, are going to be the ones that are successful. They will see their careers progress. The individuals who are fighting against it are going to be the ones that are sort of languishing behind. But I'm very much somebody who will look for the opportunities rather than someone who will kind of look to go, well, I don't like the way that that's going and I'm going to resist it. It's about embracing that development and understand, seeing the opportunities and working out, okay, well, where do I fit in with that? And whether that's that there is the opportunity to step up, to evolve, to manage, to lead, whether there is there are some industries or some roles, as I mentioned, machines can be operated by machines. If you're the individual that was operating that machine, then, there are other machines that might not be able to be operated in that same way. So what do you need to be able to do that role? Or, what skills do I need to be able to do something else? And, the reality is that, if we look back, Victorians in the cotton mills and so on, we have evolved and we will continue to evolve. And it's just, in what way can we as an individual, I'm an employment law solicitor. I can learn to work with AI to streamline what I do. Is AI going to replace me in an employment tribunal room arguing a client's case? Highly unlikely in my lifetime, highly unlikely into the future, because AI doesn't have that ability to humanly connect. And
that's the first thing, and most importantly.
Yeah. And a lot of what I do in terms, certainly advising clients, not necessarily policy drafting and contracts and that type of thing, but there are nuances that only human beings, certainly in my view, can deal with. And, being able to empathise with a client and to, connect with them on an emotional level is not something I can see AI being able to do. So, it's those sorts of things, the softer skills perhaps that, if you want to protect yourself against an AI evolution, I would be encouraging people out there to think about. And, as I say, I don't see AI replacing a lot of things, but we've got to learn how to work with it and how to use it as a tool to support what we're doing.
And do you think as part of that, it could be reasonable for the organization to seek either some governmental support or to allocate out of their own budgets some support when it comes to training and upskilling of the individuals within their organization if the trend is already leading them in that direction?
Absolutely. And I've been saying for a good number of years, and we're working with clients in terms of training, quite often employers will promote somebody because they're very good at what they do.
Yeah.
I'm a very good employment lawyer. That doesn't mean that I'm a good team leader. It doesn't mean that I'm a good manager of an employment law team. I hope that I am, but it doesn't necessarily, for other people, it doesn't necessarily mean that's the case. And, in terms of AI, in terms of other skills for managers, I think it is really important that employers recognise that individuals need different skills for the different roles that they perform. Mm-hmm. And as they step up, they need the training to be able to perform those roles. And quite often what I see in terms of the issues, the cases that cross my desk, you look at it and you think, well, actually, if the manager had dealt with that in a different way, we wouldn't be where we are. That's not necessarily a criticism of the manager, because they've not known how to do things any differently. And if you can put that training base in place, then you've got a whole different ballgame. And actually, you've got managers working with employees rather than managers working against employees. And that changes, the dynamic quite significantly. And, again, that works both ways. It's employees. Quite often we see, as I mentioned earlier, actually, employees who might be being coached or performance managed, and the employees don't see that they need it. And it goes back to what I was saying earlier, ask questions, listen to what you're being told as well. Being told that there's another way isn't criticism, it's a growth opportunity.
Totally, yeah.
And I think, I've always been of that thought. And I distinctly remember one conversation with a partner at a previous firm where I produced what I thought was a really, really great piece of work, really great drafted. It was a response to a claim. And I'd gone through it really carefully. And, we were having a conversation about it. And he said, well, what about this? And I kind of looked at him and I said, well, I hadn't really thought of that. And, my initial thought was he was criticising me. But within a very short space of time, and I mean literally seconds, I thought, well, actually, no, you've got a point there. And, that was a sort of a revolutionary moment for me in my working life. He was looking at the wording of the statute, which is clearly very important in terms of what we do. And ever since that moment, we've got a book of employment law that's that thick, and it is very, very thin, kind of, see-through paper type thing. And you will often see me looking at that book when I'm dealing with a case, and I am constantly referring to it because the wording of the law is critical, and it's that detail that you need. And, I'm not saying that I never looked at it before, but it's that conversation that, the partner saying to me, have you thought about that was the start of that process for me, or certainly the more careful looking at things. And that I could have quite easily looked at that as a criticism. I could have quite easily gone, I know what I'm doing. I'm 3-4 years into my professional career, not listened to it. But I think definitely think I'm a better employment law solicitor for that. So it's listening to those around you, listening to those with the experience, and not, taking that on board, taking it forward, and how you can work with it in your own way, make it your own, but listen to it and ask those questions. Ask those questions and listen to the answers, but listen to what people have got to say to you as well.
That's priceless, Julie. Thank you so much for this example. It's also about how do you react when given a feedback, right? And this is a big topic in, career development, and I'm so grateful that you've exemplified it quite nicely. As part of our discussion, I know that we've got an interesting topic that we've obviously addressed when it comes to the recurring cases, the frequent cases, and we've discussed anywhere from redundancies, from PIP, performance improvement plans, anything that you feel might be as well mentioned as part of giving some tips to those who might be listening our interaction today, that you feel this is absolutely stellar for them to know. Because, in my head at the moment, just following through our dialogue, is that feeling that this is so essential, knowing these tips and being aware of what your rights are, that it almost feels that it needs to be taught in the higher education realm, as opposed to just being given by chance to people to handle. What do you think on that note?
That's a difficult one. And
Yes.
I think the main issue, certainly with employment law, is that it changes so frequently, and that there are cases that are being heard every day in employment tribunals, the Employment Appeal Tribunal, the Court of Appeal, etc. And, those cases can give quite significant nuances. And over the course of my career, there have been cases where quite literally we've had to go, pens down, we need to read this case because it is so significant, and it can change, a particular type of, area of law and how that operates. So I from the perspective of teaching it, I think that would be difficult, because it, you almost teach it one day and the next day it's no longer current. And I'm exaggerating quite a bit, because there's a lot of law that's been around for quite some time. But I think it's, people are having an they've got a greater awareness of what their rights are. And, the time of individuals talking to somebody at to their friends in a pub, or, someone they don't even know in a pub, and kind of going, this is my situation. And then, they get advice and they take that forward. There's a lot of information on the internet now. And again, I would say, if as an individual you're trying to get some steer on what your legal rights might be, pick and choose what you're looking at on the websites, choose a trusted resource, look at the .gov.uk websites first and foremost. They give very good summaries of what different areas of the law mean. If you're delving into the area of discrimination, there are some trusted guides from various commissions. The Equality and Human Rights Commission is a good example. There's a lot of good guidance in there. Some of it is quite difficult to read through, but actually some of it is quite difficult from a perspective of, have I got a claim or not? So I think general awareness, definitely. The detail, I think, has to come at the point in time that you're wanting to know what your rights are. And that can be some trusted resources on the web. It can be a quick conversation with a solicitor. It can be engaging with a solicitor. And again, if you're talking about employment law, I would say find a specialist. Don't go into, your high street firm that doesn't have a specialist employment law solicitor. As I say, the law is that thick, and I'm not exaggerating. I'm probably under exaggerating. You need somebody who knows what they're talking about, who is dealing with that day to day.
It's specialized basically to offer that support,
Absolutely.
isn't it? It sounds, to someone who's just stepping it all in, sounds a bit overwhelming, hence why it needs that little bit of expertise behind. And then when it comes to how do you address certain instances, as you've just mentioned, be it a particular case, obviously there is an element of you delving into the internet sources, but then going into the trusted sources, the .gov.uk websites, and then seeking through some further digging if it requires that digging and that support, because it's very important how you address that in order to not harm your later career development, which could be also at stake. And as part of that, we do have an interesting now part of our interview, which is the flash gaming part, the gamification in the mix, which I'm very much looking forward to. And as part of that, the answers that you would be giving would be short, Julie, and on my end, there would be just some of the favorite questions that are being asked towards the end, if that's okay. So, are we ready?
Yep, ready. Let's go.
Excellent. Let's drum roll. So, first one, what inspires you most about the future of work?
Future of work is the pace of change. You know, where I was 20 plus years ago is very different to where I am now. And I can't wait to see what the future holds.
I love that. A little bit of expectation in the mix. What concerns you most about the future of employment law?
I think it's the trust in the law and the different views. The employer, I think, feels that employment law is against them, and I think actually the employees feel that employment law is against them as well. And the truth is, it's there to protect both parties. And I hope that, you know, as part of my role, I'm encouraging, you know, look, it works for both of you. Let's work it out.
It's all down to a professional interpretation, isn't it? The third one, helping clients with workplace challenges. What's your favorite part, please?
Favorite part is finding the solution, and it's very, very rare that I can't even think of an example where I haven't found a solution, whether it's for an employee or an employer. There's always a route. It's just how difficult that journey might be.
If you don't mind, just a very quick question that is not part of it.
That's
Were
fine.
there any particular cases that you recall that were really, really painful as a solution?
Yeah, I mean, there's a number of cases where I look back and it's a long and drawn out process. And, you know, there's one particular case that is ongoing, has been ongoing since before COVID. And, you know, I really feel for our client in that particular situation. Could I have done anything differently to make that less painful? Unfortunately not in this particular situation. I can't be any more detailed, unfortunately, but I try and make it as painless as possible. I try and make things clear and understandable. And, you know, that I think is as much as I can do.
Makes sense, Julie. Thank you. What you're most passionate about?
Most passionate about, I love the law, and I hope that's come across today. You know,
Definitely.
I love employment law. I love the nuances of it. I love the different aspects of it. I love the fact that, you know, no 2 days are the same. Mm-hmm. Helping, whether it's an employer or an employee, just love it. Absolutely.
I think you've definitely incentivized a lot of graduates out there to actually seek a career in employment law. You are most concerned about?
Most concerned about, I guess, as much as I'm looking forward to what the changes are, what are the changes going to be and what does that mean? Who knows? You know, I'm looking forward to it, but there's some trepidation around that as well.
It happens with all of us, doesn't it, at the moment? What's the most precious human skill in the workplace today, do you think?
I think being able to work with people, being able to, you know, having that empathy, having that understanding, appreciating that people can have different perspectives on on the same situation, and appreciating, understanding that.
So human connection. What's most precious AI skill in the workplace today, do you think?
Well, I think being able to work with it, you know, not being scared of it, not, you know, embracing it, knowing how to use it as well, I guess.
Yep, definitely. Skills for life or skills for resilience?
Skills for, if I can do it this way, skills for life, which includes skills for resilience.
I was often asked, can I do both? Performance improvement plans, a chance for growth or a red flag?
chance for growth, always a chance for growth.
A very positive person, aren't you, Julie? If you could have a superpower to resolve workplace conflicts, what would that be?
I'd love a magic wand to just be able to resolve it, full stop.
That would be brilliant to have one for whichever situation you might need in life. What's the best career advice you've ever received yourself?
Ask questions. Ask questions.
Love that.
I think it's not necessarily for career, professional and personal. Ask questions and learn.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much, Julia. Absolutely priceless. Enjoyed our conversation today, and thank you so much for coming and being part of it.
No, thank you. It's been brilliant. Thank you.
Cheers.